Aletta Rochat is a professional speaker, trainer, author, and a certified world-class speaking coach. She is a trustee of both the Allgro Trust and the Eden, which oversees the management of funds of both non-profit organizations. Aletta Rochat owns her own company called Voicing Your Potential, a company she founded back in 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, without spending too much time on introduction, I think we want to hear her and learn from her how we can always be ace in our interview. Aletta Rochat.
Thank you so much for a wonderful, warm introduction. I have to say that this is the very first time I've participated in a Rotary meeting online. And it's an absolute pleasure to know that me from Cape Town, South Africa, can be connected to you in Singapore. I just love what technology makes available to us. I have huge admiration for what Rotary does. It's enriched my life immensely. And you might be thinking, well, I'm not going for a job interview, so why do I have to worry about interviews? You might be self-employed, or there might be many reasons why you're not going for a job interview. The reality is the skills that you use for a job interview are the very same skills you would have when you're selling a project to somebody in your community, or you're getting people to donate funds to support one of your projects. Anytime you have to sell your ideas, you need to be able to confidently speak up and articulate your worth in a way that's relevant to the person listening. And that's what interviews is all about. I'm going to take you through a very short presentation. If I can be allowed to share my screen, that would be brilliant. Just make sure it's all set up for you. Now it's not showing the right screen. I love technology, don't you? Let me just get it correct. Hopefully you can now all see a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So let's just take you through a few things. I created a download for you today. I've only got a few minutes to give a lot of information. So if you'd like to take a screenshot of this link and download it, it'll help you in giving you information that you can keep and refer to after today's presentation is over. So feel free to download that. The problem with interviews is that we often don't take them seriously enough. I was always one of those people who said, I'll just wing it. I was fairly confident. And for most of my early career, just going into the interview with very little preparation was enough, until the day it wasn't. I went for a job interview and I was delighted when they phoned back and said, yes, we'd like to offer you the job, but they offered me a job one level lower than the one I was interviewing for. And of course, that didn't do my ego any good. And that's when I realized I needed to up my game. I needed to take it more seriously. And these days, there are plenty of materials online. There are YouTube videos, there are books, there are all sorts of things that you can download. You can download the 100 most common interview questions, and that won't be a problem at all. But the problem is that is simply theory. You have to be able to put that theory into practice even when you're anxious or nervous in the interview. Many of us simply don't know how to prepare. What do we do? And because we don't interview that often necessarily, often our skills are a bit rusty. And many of us believe that our CV will do the talking, that they'll just look at my CV and they'll be impressed. The reality is people scan your CV at best, and it also cannot speak up for you. They want confirmation from you that you are as good as you look on your CV. And the only way you can convey that information is to be speaking up confidently in a way that's relevant to the role you're applying for. This is pre-COVID. Glassdoor did a survey, and for every job that was advertised, on average, 250 applications were received. A maximum of 6 people of those 250 were granted an interview, but only 1 got the job. So this statistic just tells you how hard it is to get the interview. And you owe it to yourself and to your future to prepare for that interview, because it's so hard to get the interview. And if you go into that interview unprepared, you are missing opportunity, and you're missing an opportunity that could pay dividends for the many, many years to come. So I've just got a few tips for you. Number one, control what you can control. In other words, you can control the amount of preparation you do. You can't control the number of questions you get or which questions you get, but you can prepare for many questions. And if you spend time doing the preparation and practicing your answers, you significantly and dramatically increase your ability to be the preferred candidate, the likelihood that they will choose you. You've got to make time for this. This is not something that you can just do 5 minutes before your interview. You need to take this seriously. And my best advice to you is get help. If you are going to prepare interview questions, thinking about the answers is not the same as speaking the answers. The best preparation you can do is to make a cell phone video of you answering a few questions, like, for instance, why should we hire you? Or what would your last boss say about you? Or tell me about a time when you managed conflict. And think about the answers, and then record your answers and watch that video and see where you can improve. See what you do well and see what you can improve. I'm going to give you a template, and that's also on the download, but this is a framework that you can use to help you when you're framing and planning how you're going to answer a question. So if someone says to you, describe a time when you had to deal with conflict, you follow this formula, the STAR plus storytelling formula. You describe the situation. In other words, I was leading a team and we were tasked with putting on a conference. And that was the situation in a nutshell. I'll come back to the impact before and after. The task that you were given was to not only put on the conference, but to break even. There was to be no loss and no profit in the conference, and obviously you wanted as many people there as possible. The conflict came in when the team was pulling in different directions, and one team member wanted to spend a lot of money on getting famous people to be keynote speakers at the event before they knew they had revenue to cover the cost of those speakers. So that would be the challenge that you were faced due to the conflict and people thinking that a different course of action was right. The action, in an interview, you want to describe the action you took. And that might have been that you laid out in a spreadsheet exactly how much it was going to cost to get the famous speaker in, and how many people would have to sign up to cover just that cost, never mind how many people had to come to the conference to cover all the costs for the conference. So your action was bringing the facts to the party and bringing a bit of reality in terms of the decision making. The result was hopefully that the team came to a consensus based on probable fact that you would only book a keynote speaker if you had 20 people signed up, because that would cover the cost of the conference plus the keynote speaker. The lesson learned is an important one. This is where you say, the lesson I learned from it is that when a team is managing a project that has finance attached to it, that we have to have some ground rules in place right at the beginning, so that we all understand the framework and the constraints within which we operate. And perhaps in this case, that hadn't been described up front. And you can always contrast what the teamwork was like before you took action and what the teamwork was like after you took action. So afterwards, it would have been more trust was involved in the team, and people understood what we were trying to achieve, and we all pulled together in the same direction. Any story you share should be relevant to the role you're applying for, and there must be a purpose to sharing the story. It must spotlight one of your strengths. You don't just want to tell a story for the sake of telling a story. You want to tell a story because it shows you in action. It brings your skills to life, and it makes you more likely to be the preferred candidate. So that, in a nutshell, is the STAR Plus storytelling technique. It is a simple technique to use. It is a technique that will definitely make you stand out from other people doing a similar interview, because you've got structure, because you've got purpose, and because you can highlight your strengths. You want to sell yourself, but you don't want to come across as arrogant. And by telling a story, you can demonstrate that you're a good team player. You can demonstrate that you're proactive, and you can demonstrate that you can have an impact by bringing your skills and your thinking and your problem solving to a situation. The STAR Plus storytelling technique, you're not going to necessarily get it right away. My suggestion to you is that you build up a bank of stories. Stories so that you can have one story for conflict. You might have another story for leadership to demonstrate your leadership skills. Another one that's good to have is a story about when you dealt with ethics that were being violated. Or there can be another one where you brought people together for a common purpose. And one story could possibly be used for many questions, but you have to have these stories ready ahead of time. A clue to the kind of stories that work well in this situation is perhaps a story where you learned a life lesson that you've never forgotten. And in my own life, I can think of times when I've been leading teams, and the moment I realized that the more I validated my team, the more we wanted to work together. And that was something that once I saw it, I could never unsee it. So that has the potential for a good story. Another one might be when you made a mistake and you learned from that mistake, and since then you've never repeated that mistake. Some people are very hesitant in an interview to speak about anything negative. But there's a way to do that strategically, which can still shine a light on your strengths. For instance, if someone says to you, what is your greatest weakness? Some people think, well, I'll just say I'm an overachiever or I'm a perfectionist, and therefore they'll come across as if they don't have any weaknesses. Don't fall into that trap. Rather be honest about something, but then say what you've done about it. For instance, if somebody had to ask me what's my weakness, I would say, well, I don't know about you, but my email inbox seems to have a life of its own. I struggle to keep everything filed and categorized. I wish I had a zero inbox, but I don't. So that's the weakness that I'm admitting to. The important thing is for me to say what I've done about it. And I can say I've learned to use various tools that are available. For instance, there's one called Sorted, which helps me very easily and quickly tag my emails and file them. And since I've been using Sorted, it's helped me to be more efficient. And of course, I know exactly how to use that search function, so I can always find what I need, when it matters most. So even though I've admitted to a weakness, the fact that I've done something about the weakness demonstrates that I'm teachable, that I'm authentic, that I'm not trying to pretend I'm perfect, and also that I'm willing to learn new ways of coping with a weakness. No one expects you to be perfect, but they do expect you to take steps and use technology to manage any perceived weaknesses you may have. So the secret to acing your interviews, 90% of it lies in the preparation phase. If you do a decent amount of prep where you verbalize your answers, you get feedback from a friend, you practice answering a number of questions. If you do that, your confidence grows. And then when you come to the interview, you are already a more confident, articulate, engaging candidate. But if you're just going to rush in and hope for the best and hope that they don't ask you difficult questions, you will be caught out inevitably. So my query to you and my question to you is, how badly do you want the role you're interviewing for? What does it mean to you? What could it mean to your future if you got that role? And if you want it badly enough, even though you're already busy, You will find the time, you will make the time, you'll find the resources you need, you'll partner with people who can help you. As I said, I've always been relatively confident when it came to interviews until a few years ago when I when I ran for election to the Toastmasters International Board of Directors, and I knew I had to up my game. And that was the first time I employed an interview coach. And I can tell you that those sessions were tough because questions were just being fired at me and I had to come up with answers, and I got feedback. And I did that role playing with my interview coach as well as my campaign team. And I didn't always look forward to those sessions because it was hard. But the transformation I experienced was incredible. I just learned to have an opinion, to be able to articulate that opinion, and to be confident in my ideas. So that is what someone else helping you through this process can do for you. And I encourage you to seek help to make sure that a role that you are applying for or an idea that you are trying to sell has the best chance of being the chosen idea, that you are the best choice for a preferred candidate. But it all lies in you taking it seriously, doing the prep, and becoming skilled at it. There are many things in life that we have to practice. When we were young, we learned to ride a bicycle, or we learned to play an instrument, or we learned to handle technology, whatever it is. The more you practice, the better you get. So if it's important to you, I urge you to make the time. I'm deliberately going to not go into more detail right now because I'd like to open up discussion, questions, and see if I can answer any specific questions that you have. Because I assume that you want them to raise their hand. How do you want them to let you know what questions there are?
I think if they have any questions, they can ask. I think Richard wants to ask a question, right, Richard? Anybody who wants to speak can ask a question.
Okay, Anil here from Rotary Club of Pandan Valley. Aletta, hi, how are you? I was last in South Africa in 1998. Started in Cape Town, Stellenbosch, Knysna, Kimberley, Pretoria, Sun City, Johannesburg, and several other places. All right, so we'll take that offline. First point is this, right? You know, you mentioned when you started off, you said that you got to learn how to speak up and articulate, right? My question is this. You know, there are people whose pronunciation and English, the command of English is quite bad, and they take it upon themselves to still, you know, moderate and handle and insist on you know, driving talks and all of those kind of things. You know, and it kind of really puts people off when you find someone who doesn't articulate accurately and yet, you know, insist on that. I mean, you know, do you feel that those are the kind of people who really need to actually go through and learn, you know, some of the skills that you discussed and you know, go through a program? You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that when you were going to stand up for the international board, you still had someone come in and train you, right? You know, how did you decide that you needed that? And how come there are people out there who would moderate and go through, you know, talks and all that, who can't articulate, can't speak proper English and all of that? How did you come to realize that it was necessary for you to go through that process?
I think for me, I'll answer the last part of the question first. I had observed many other candidates running for international office in Toastmasters. So I was aware of the process they went through, and I myself had interviewed many of them. When I was in various roles, you spend a lot of time interviewing the candidates. To give you an idea, I must have had about 70 panel interviews in a few days at our convention, because all the district teams come and interview the candidates. So I knew I was going to have days of being interviewed. So I was very well aware of the standard that was out there. And I also was committed to the fact that if I'm going to run, I want to be a good candidate. I didn't want to leave things to chance. So I was prepared to do the work because I felt I owed it to myself and I owed it to the people who were going to vote for me and support me, that I was a credible candidate, and more importantly than that, that I was a candidate who could function well on the board once I was elected. So for me, it was just a dedication to excellence. But I knew that I didn't want to leave it to chance. It meant too much to me. When it comes to people with different accents, I have maybe a different view to some people, depending, and I'm speaking in generalities here. When clients come to me or people say to me, Aletta, as a speech coach, do you do accent reduction? And I always say no, because number one, that's not my field of expertise. Number two, I find that often if people structure what they're going to say in the right way and make it engaging, then often the accent becomes less of an issue. But if someone rambles on and isn't engaging, then the accent can very much get in the way. So I think you have to be honest with yourself and say, well, is my accent a problem? And if it is, try and understand what about your accent. It's probably not everything you do. It might be one or two consonants that you're not articulating properly. It might be vowels. It might be word usage. But it's very difficult to give a generalization without me hearing that person. But if that person is someone you work with, you could give them feedback, but give them specific feedback and say, when you say that word, I didn't understand what you meant. Maybe think of using another word. And of course, Toastmasters is the perfect place to get that feedback on a regular basis. And we are fortunate that that is what we do. And at every club meeting, that is something that we practice. So encourage them to become a Toastmaster if that is something that's getting in their way. If they don't think it's getting in their way, chances are they're not going to do anything about it. That's just the reality of it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one question for Aletta. You know, in Asian culture, especially among the Chinese, Japanese, and whatever, Koreans, we tend to be very shy, right? And when you ask a lot of questions, we tend to be very humble, say, you know, we try our best, we'll do whatever necessary. We wouldn't go out and say, you know, I'm very good at this and stuff like that. How would you recommend a person like me handle myself, for example?
Okay, very good question. Everything you say happens in a cultural context and it happens in a business context. So as you rightly said, in certain cultures, saying I'm wonderful would come across in an offensive way, which is obviously not what you want. But what you can do, and that's where storytelling is so good, you can tell a story, and often in that story can be someone else who teaches you something. In other words, you don't have to be the hero in the story always, but you can say, when I observed this other leader doing this, that, and the next thing, I saw leadership in action and I learned that I need to treat my team in the same way. So in that way, it shows that you're teachable. It shows that you look up to authority and respect authority, but also that you take lessons from authority. So I think storytelling is a way that you could do it without it coming across as I'm so wonderful. And, you know, you've got to be culturally sensitive, because else if they think you're going to upset everyone, there's no chance of you being hired. So you have to do it within the nuances of the culture that you operate in, both within the country and within the industry, because certain industries demand certain skills that are different to others. Are there any other questions?
Aletta, when you offer us the Star Plus technique, do you do it generally for every situation, or do you do it for only specific situation?
It doesn't need to be, I wouldn't like to say you must use it for every question. It works well for what they call behavioral questions. Often an interviewer will say to you, tell me about a time when, or can you describe when? So they're asking for a description of something that happened. That is different to character questions, where they might say, what are your greatest strengths? What are your weaknesses? What would your last boss say about you? Those are more character questions. And then, of course, you get those difficult questions, which might be, why is there a gap in your CV? Or, you know, why didn't you study further? Those are the difficult questions. So the Star Plus technique works the best for behavioral, situational questions, when they're asking you to describe a time when you applied certain skills.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Okay, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Aletta, yeah. So the question is, I've always found it to that within, so for a candidate, within that span of time for the interview, whether it be half an hour or 1 hour, is it a fair gauge of the candidate that the interviewer can estimate, how good that person is for that particular job? I mean, is it fair to the candidate that, without knowing the person, that within that span of 1 hour, you can make that judgment? So how do you go about, how does the interviewer go about, judging that?
That's a very good question. Interviewing is a process. So your CV is part of a filtering tool. So they'll look at your CV, see whether you tick many of the boxes. And when you do your CV, make sure you've got the same keywords in your CV that are in the job description, because the more you have, the more likely you are to be called for an interview. Many recruiters put the CVs through a software app that just picks up keywords. They don't even actually read your CV. So that's step one of the process. If you're lucky enough to be called in for an interview, that is step 2 of the process. Sometimes you have someone from HR interviewing you, and then you might get called back for a second interview where a line manager or somebody you'd be working directly with would interview you. Some companies have a psychometric test as another facet of the interview process. Because interviewers see many candidates, they are looking, and you've always got to go into an interview aware of what are they looking for. They want to know, number one, have you got the technical capabilities of doing the job? Have you got the experience to do justice to the role? They also want to see, are you a good culture fit? Will they get on with you? So part of your job in an interview is to make sure that you come across as likable, as engaging, as someone who's a team player. Because if at the interview stage they perceive that you're a drama queen or that you are going to be more trouble than you're worth, they will boot you out. So you've got to come across as someone they want to work with. And then they also just want to get an instinct. Often they'll get a gut feel about a candidate. They look good on paper, they interview well, but there's something that's not quite right. And yet there's another one who might not be as skilled, but they're so engaging. And immediately they'll go towards that likability factor. So it's a multifaceted thing, and it depends on who's interviewing and which stage of the process you're at. But if you see 30 candidates over a period of time, you will soon know which ones stand out. And those are the ones generally, they're skilled, they're engaging, they're likable, and they are articulate, and they're prepared. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a recruitment agent at a very high level, and she said, if people don't do research of the company ahead of time, it tells me, number one, either they're incapable of realizing that they should do it, or number two, they're lazy. And those are both red flags. So if you're not prepared, they read more into it. So make sure you do the preparation that you need so that you can show up as your best self in that interview. I'm sure we're pretty much towards the end of our time, BS.
Could I just pop in one
last question?
Yes, could I?
Yeah,
hi,
Aletta. Yes.
Hi. Aletta, thank you in sharing your thoughts. Do you come across a situation where the interviewing panel from the body language would tell you that their mind is made up? It's just a formality going through the interview process. They've seen the CVs, they know who they're going to select. And then when you attend an interview, you sort of can tell from the body language that, oh, all right, fine. Is there some way that we can handle that sort of situation?
It's very difficult for you to handle. I think it is a reality. Often they're going through the motions of having an interview, because then they can say, well, I interviewed 10 people and I found a candidate, even though they pre-selected their candidate. It is a reality. An interview is an opportunity to practice your skills. So even if you pick up you think that's what's going on, still give it your best shot, because it's interview practice, and interview practice is like gold. It keeps you sharp, it keeps you engaged. So I would just say, believe in yourself and don't take every rejection as a personal rejection. There could be other forces at play that are way beyond your control. But my attitude would be, if you get an interview, say yes. Even if you don't really think you want the job, get the interview practice. It'll stand you in good stead. And you never know, there might be a surprise there that you didn't see ahead of time that you could take advantage of. But if you're not in the interview, you won't have that opportunity.
Thank you, Aletta. Thank you.
Thank you, Aletta. I
One
just want to
question.
say one thing, Aletta. There is something that you actually mentioned, that if you want to really get yourself up front for a possible job interview or being prospected, you should put your LinkedIn, which is what people look at, right? And you use your LinkedIn as a fishing tool, as a streaming tool for people to actually maybe think about you as a possible candidate. Would you like to share a little bit about that before we finish?
Yes, thank you. LinkedIn is often, again, a filtering tool that HR professionals and recruiters use. So take care to look at your LinkedIn profile from the perspective of a recruiter. You want to have a professional photo there. You don't want a photo of you on the beach with your friends, as stunning as you may look. That's not a professional image unless the industry you're going into demands that you're on the beach. Then it's a different story. But you've got to have a number of criteria. You've got to have, your work history. You've got to have connections. You've got to have associations that you belong to. You also, if you put content on LinkedIn, articles, that also counts in your favor. So that's another screening tool they use. If you sign up with that link I gave you earlier on, you'll get onto my mailing list. And every now and again, I send out information like that on your LinkedIn profile and 9 steps to improve your LinkedIn profile. So that is, again, something you can control. If you just do a little bit of research and get a little bit of help, you can improve your chances, and that LinkedIn profile is there forever until you update it. So make sure it reflects the professional image, the professional that you are, and make sure it looks like someone that you want to employ yourself. That's the best kind of profile to have.